Good morning. You're listening to Central Wisconsin's 24-hour information station, AM 1320 WFHR. It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our buddy Jesse from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, and the reason he's here, it's time for our monthly visit with City Hall. Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for the entire show, and we had originally planned or hoped to have some of the mayor's youth council members here, but they got this thing called finals, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, their priorities. They've got their priorities right, I'll tell you.
That's right. But we do have a breaking story, and I thank Bill Clendenning for calling us up and letting us know about it. There's a power outage going on downtown at the River Block building and also in the downtown mill. So what's going on?
We understand there was something that impacted the turbine operation at the hydros. So we understand there's a diver on site looking at the issue and trying to figure out what the extent of the problem is. So at this point, we don't have a lot of information about it other than there was an impact to the hydro operation and the turbine that obviously creates the power.
Okay, now how much of the downtown is affected by City Hall? You said has
City Hall has power. We're on our own. We're on the main grid system, but obviously the hydros power the paper mill and its associated operations. And I'm not sure. I mean, they've got some fallover capabilities, obviously, for power outages. So my hope is that they're not affected for a long-term issue because that could really impact their operations and their obviously their production. But obviously the River Block still has some connection with that property and power service, but that's the extent of it as I understand.
Okay. So hopefully you folks, if you are affected by that, you'll be getting your power back soon. I appreciate the update. An interesting Wisconsin Rapids Common Council meeting last night. A little testier than normal, but it's a new council getting their feet wet. And in fact, a couple of times you had to rule things out of order, which is part of the learning process of parliamentary procedure. But I'd like to first off get your thoughts on that and what they did with the apartment complex on the west side. Obviously, the residents didn't want it for their reason. But I always find it interesting when you have other landlords and stuff who are opposed to something. That to me sounds like more like we don't want competition. I mean, I'm sorry, that's what it looks like. That's the appearance about it. But your thoughts about that and what kind of a message it sends to this developer or any other developer who wants to come to the city?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, and this is something that I've concerned my administration with, and that's housing. Recognizing that if our city doesn't take strategic, proactive steps to address its housing stock, and that's from single family to multifamily to neighborhood revitalization efforts, our economy will not be much different than it is today. And so I think that's a sheer reality that our residents need to understand. And, in this case, there were maybe half a dozen or so neighboring property owners that were against the development. And this is a case where, as the mayor of the entire city, who is concerned with the entire economy and all of the neighborhoods of our city, this was a prime opportunity for us to create supply into the demand equation when it comes to West Side revitalization. I was thinking on the way over here and a little bit last night after the meeting, when was the last time we had a significant residential development on the west side of our community? And I'd have to look back at permitting records to tell me that, but I can anecdotally say it's been at least a decade. And we've had some small 6-unit developments, but obviously this was a much larger development. It was entirely market rate. And so on the spectrum of what people generally like and what people don't like, this should have been one of those that, wow, we've got market rate, we've got family opportunities. And I think from a siting standpoint, despite the neighborhood's concerns, because a lot of the concerns were very anecdotal and weren't backed by sheer volume or fact, that I look at siting that property on the corner of 17th and Rosecrans and look at the proximity to Meade School. And I've done walking school bus, and those kids are walking further than this development would have been to school every day from various parts of the west side of the community. So to put 48 families and maybe 5 or so blocks from their elementary school, you couldn't get much closer in maybe a much more ideal situation than that. Plus 17th Avenue has a crossing guard, not to mention the YMCA Boys and Girls Club development that's going to happen same number of blocks, maybe more like 10 blocks away at the mall property. When you cite these sort of developments, I always think of a bigger picture. I take a big picture view, a long range view, and it really disappoints me because I think the council had a prime opportunity to postpone this. The developer in Wood County had said, can we postpone this a month or a period of time to allow the developer to meet with the neighborhood to talk about how they would like the site laid out. I mean, that's really part 2 of this. Unfortunately, the process only allows for rezoning first and then the site plan work to follow. So ultimately last night they voted against the rezoning of that property. It was anticipated that this development would have been in the $4 to $6 million of construction. So obviously the community is going to lose out on that construction activity, or at least that particular part of town. And the reality too is we don't have parcels of property in that 5 to 7 acre nature that fit these types of developments. So we've seen a lot of them cited on the east side, right? With the Swiderski properties, they've put up maybe 6 apartment buildings on the city's east side near Mid-State Technical College, which is great because it serves a lot of mid-state students and a lot of working professionals. When we talk about trying to stimulate business in our Rapids West Side Business Park, which doesn't have a lot of available property but has a fair amount. And when businesses and site selectors look at locating in communities, they generally give us a basic inquiry, respond to this request for information. And when we respond to what's the housing vacancy rate or occupancy rate, our city has one of the highest occupancy rates of all of central Wisconsin communities. So what that tells you is that our demand for housing is unmet. That we have housing, we all can find where that housing is, generally identify it, that is generally uninhabitable or not desirable. And that's generally your oldest, your more, the ones that have lacked a lot of maintenance. And so generally multifamily, there's some properties in town that are quite aged and they haven't seen the reinvestment or redevelopment that maybe would make them more desirable. And then the second part you look at is, what's the unemployment rate of Wisconsin Rapids? Right now, the unemployment rate in Wisconsin Rapids is in the 4% range. One of the lowest unemployment rates that our communities experienced in a long, long time. So if we're going to grow the economy, or if we want a community that looks different than it does today, we are going to have to import residents. And where are you going to put those residents? Well, you're probably going to put them in Point and Plover, unless the city can get its act together to support redevelopment and housing projects in the city limits. Or they're going to continue to grow in places like Grand Rapids, which are great for the region, but they don't do anything for the tax base. They don't do anything for me as a taxpayer who is looking not necessarily to pay less taxes, but to maybe stave off future tax increases. So this housing project would have brought probably $4 to $6 million in increment, paid a significant amount of city taxes, not to mention county, state, school district taxes, technical college taxes. So it's really frustrating because here we are. The council decided to forego a postponement of the item to kill it last night, and we're going to continue to engage with the developer. What's interesting is this developer actually has 2 other projects they already own in the city that they provide property management services for. So they're already here, but certainly we all can drive to places like Appleton and Plover and these growing communities and see the extent that they have built so many housing developments. And I believe that many of those communities didn't say no. And it's a tough reality for me to live with because I know this community has a perception, and maybe rightfully so, to not being very business friendly.
And this leads into the other question too about this being the country feeling and it's in the city.
That's right.
And cities change. I mean, where I live out on 2 Mile, that used to be a country.
Yeah.
Where I go to church at St. Luke's, I used to be Grand Rapids. I used to be. Things change.
That's right.
So I understand those families, but Why not at least have the meeting? Have a meeting.
That's right. And explore the ideas, right? If you want to put walking trails through the property, you want more tree cover. The developer was working on revising the whole kind of park idea of that property. It's not completely built out, so to speak. I mean, they didn't put building and asphalt on every inch of that property, and they believed that they could actually count for some actual interplay with the rest of the neighborhood. Not to mention traffic. You know, Rosecrans was redeveloped a number of years ago. Those are not cheap reconstruction projects, and to directly serve maybe a half a dozen or so parcels is a very expensive endeavor. So at the end of the day, it's our desire to get more development on these corridors. Number one, it's more efficient and it's more effective for our infrastructure to have more customers on it than just than arterials and infrastructure being servicing only a small number of homes.
And the bottom line, you still have a property. Wood County owns this, right?
That's right. Yep.
But obviously, they don't plan on owning it forever if they were trying to get rid of it.
That's right.
So what's going to happen?
Well, and that's an interesting point because the county board was unanimous in the sale of this property. And, you know, the city has maybe 5 county board representatives that represent property in the city. And those even in Marshfield and the neighboring communities, they said, you know, this is a great opportunity to get the property back in the tax roll and to be put to a productive use. You know, I lived in the country. I lived on the west side of town growing up, and I loved the woods. But let me tell you, at some point, if the community is going to change, these are the steps it needs to take to change.
Okay. 715-424-2600, the number to call. And we have our first caller this morning. You can use those headsets, Your Honor, and we'll get our first caller on the air. Good morning. You're on the Morning Magazine.
Hi. Let me just say, as an elected official, what happened in this situation, in my opinion, was great. Those people got out. You know, they're taxpayers, too. I think cities should be, sure, we got the unemployment rate way down, but I still think all these empty industrial parks we have in Southwood County, I just think we should be concerned about blighted areas, not undeveloped areas, but blighted areas. I think as elected officials, we should do something about these. That's what they did in New York City. That's where TIF districts come from, was to get rid of these shanties and stuff like that people are still living in with low income and move in there and clean them up. Give them decent housing. Well, we do everything for industry, everything for people who have money. You know, so I'm glad to see those people show up. Well, why didn't the other people show up? And that's what these meetings are all about. And elected officials acted to their constituency, which I think is great. Just another perspective on something.
Yeah, and I would completely debate that because I don't know where you're going to put the people that are living in the shanties today. Wisconsin Rapids has 3% of its housing stock that's unoccupied. Where are you going to move the people that you're going to come and disrupt and kick them to the curb, tell them to live in other communities? I don't think that's appropriate. You've got to create supply on the end, the one side of the equation, so you can move those folks into the other. And frankly, this isn't for wealthy people. The developer told me that 2 individuals that are working, that are making $10 to $13 an hour, are generally the folks that they attract to live in these developments. That economically, people spend 30% of their income on housing, whether you like it or not. It's more than I spend, but I choose to live in a modest home and have a small property and all that. But many of our generation is currently seeking to live in multifamily rental housing because they don't know if they're going to live in a community. Are they going to love the place, or are they going to find out that the community isn't for them? And I think, you know, while I completely support blight elimination, and we're going to work on we've got actually some other parallel programs we're working on. That's not to say we're just doing this, but I think, you know, where are you going to put those people you're going to kick out of their shanties? And you're going to come in and tell eminent domain and tell them that they've got to leave? I don't think that's real appropriate.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think the we portion of this is your altar persons that stood up and defended these people who came to those meetings. That's proud to be an elected official when you see people show up with their concerns. So
okay.
That's my point on it.
Bill, since you were with Wood County approved the sale of this property unanimously, did it not?
Yeah, yes, it did. In the way it was proposed, yes, it was.
Okay.
And so, yes, we said, let's put this up for sale. Let's get it back on the tax roll. That's what we wanted. And so whatever agreement was with the developer, that's fine. The people in the city of Wisconsin Rapids objected to it.
Not the people, the neighbors. I think let's be very clear. I prescribe to a very trustee approach to my elected position. It sounds like Bill's very much a delegate. He gets 5 calls. Bill opposes that are against something. Bill opposes it. But in my case, I represent 18,000 constituents, and I have to bear in mind the long range and the health, safety, and welfare of all of our residents, and that includes their economic and social well-being. And in this case, I believe that the decision was in the contrary to that. And I believe that residents that called me and businesses that reached out to me and said, you know what, I need more customers on this side of town, not only to survive, but to thrive. And so I have to represent all of those interests. And I think that's the big difference between Bill's approach and my approach, and they're stark contrasts.
Well, you're different constituencies.
Well, that's true as well.
So we then is the people that voted against this on the city council were neighbors. Not somebody that lived on the east side or somebody that lived on... I disagree with that.
No, 6 people voted against it. Five of those people lived on the east side.
No, 5 of the people that voted against it were on the east side.
The 2 people that voted for it were on the east side, and so the others were in the mixture. They represent 2 sides of the river, a couple of them.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to argue. I just glad that this... what I mean, it turned out now you'll probably have more meetings on it. Have to educate some people.
No, I don't believe there will be any further meetings on it. The development in that area has been killed.
Okay. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the call.
Okay, yeah, so what happens?
Well, it's our understanding. I mean, they could always bring back the rezoning for the property to something else. I'm going to be engaging with the county board chair and the county board members of the committee that's ultimately going to hold the authority on this position. And, at the end of the day, there's limited available property that is serviced by city sewer and water. And it's in the city's best interest to get as much of that property, within reason, of course, developed in some fashion. And that's what I was sent to the office of mayor to do. And I believe my charge isn't going to change until the day I leave office.
Okay. Now, so I guess the developer are they going to look at building a similar type facility someplace else now because the west side said no? Or are we looking at another east side development?
Well, I think it'll be a lot easier to site this on the east side, and it would be a terrible loss for the west side of our community, who needs new housing, and it needs more residents than what currently live here today. That's a given. We've looked at some west side options, but it's up to the developer whether they're going to continue to pursue the property or not. The challenge is, and this is where rezoning issues get hung up, every property starts somewhere, and the city's future land use map shows this area as residential. And so while it's an ag today, the future land use or the long-range comprehensive plan for the city is that will be residential someday. Well, that someday is today. And, as agriculture, maybe there's a farmer that wants to put up a nice farm there, and farm the property and maybe have some cows or some pigs or some chicken. I think
people would probably complain about that.
Well, that's what the zoning is for.
Yeah, I know.
And so maybe somebody wants to see that opportunity and start a nice farm there, and they maybe be successful as well. I wouldn't like to live next to that personally, but that's what the zoning would allow. I mean, It wouldn't need to be a rezoning and a public hearing and all that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, then let's get. I want to get to. There was an interesting debate. And it was heartfelt, but it was on this proposal to dramatically increase the fine for the possession of drug paraphernalia. And ultimately, the council said, well, let's meet as a committee of the whole, which is their right to further discuss this.
And that was most appropriate. The challenge with our council process was mentioned last night. We don't have a legislative committee.
Why don't we?
That's a great question. I wasn't part of the council when they decided that. They had opted to send all of that business to the Finance and Property Committee. And maybe it's good reason and time to bring that legislative committee back. I'm not sure. But the issue was to triple the fine for possession of drug paraphernalia. So it's not possession of drugs, it's the paraphernalia associated with the use of it, or a whole other category, I should say. And, I believe that there are a lot more. There's a lot more to the picture than simply punishing somebody for having a possession of some sort of drug paraphernalia. Then a lot of times it's mental health issues. They need some rehabilitation efforts. I mean, incarcerating people in this country has not gotten us anywhere, right? The Clinton era did prove that it does not work.
Tommy Thompson even admits that now.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks initially thought that, and obviously we lived through eras in our country where incarcerating people didn't get us anywhere. And I think that's the story with this piece is I personally remain opposed to it because this really sets the top threshold at which a charge could be made. So the discretion still lies within the judicial system or in law enforcement. So by the city council legislating for this is not going to get drugs out of our community. It's not going to keep people from using drugs. As Alderperson Rayom so eloquently stated last night, if people get a larger fine, they're going to steal. They're going to do something from family and friends and other resources to pay for it. And I think he has a good point made on that issue.
And the police chief Blevins said you're going to have more unpaid fines, more people in jail, and then you're dealing with overcrowding issues.
That's right. And it's a vicious cycle. At some point, you've got to get somebody the help they need. Sometimes the help they need is a slap on the wrist. Don't get me wrong, and to be put behind bars. That's sometimes the right step. But in a stepped approach, a lot of these repeat offenders, they need more help than simply being thrown in jail with a bunch of other users.
And I would think if we're going to do something, shouldn't we get together with Wood County and say, for instance, like the drug court, and ask them how we got this issue in our city. How can we work together with you and drug court on addressing it?
That's right.
I mean, shouldn't we be bringing them to the table? Because they've been looking at alternative ways of dealing with these issues.
Yeah, and I question the volume of repeat offenders, right?
Yeah.
Are we talking about repeat offenders here? Are we talking about first-time offenders? Getting probation and parole involved, who are obviously dealing with a massive caseload in this community. I mean, there's a lot of perspectives and insight, and I think there was actually some mention last night about evidence, just in general on the issues that came before the council. And this ordinance had zero evidence backing it. It was, we were going to send a strong message to those that have drug paraphernalia, that you could get this huge fine. Well, the reality is the officers who use discretion when they're issuing a citation are not going to issue a $1,500 offense. And then we also have criminal capacity to give somebody a criminal charge, and that carries a much heftier penalty. So I think there's discretion that already exists for law enforcement. I'm not sure where the issue is going to go. I think the Alderperson Koth is well-intentioned about getting drugs out of our community, but I think that, unfortunately, the approach isn't the right way.
And it goes against, as it was pointed out to me this morning, it goes against what the trend in communities on the whole issue of drug paraphernalia.
Yeah.
That's that this is a superfluous issue when it comes to the problem of drugs.
Yeah. It gets good headlines. It gets people feeling good about an issue, but it doesn't have any impact.
Yeah. Okay, we have to take our first break, and then there was also some discussion during the meeting about a change order policy when it comes to, and I think it would be a good one for a tutorial for our listeners to how the city manages large public works projects like the one that is happening right now involving the sewer and water utilities and the river, et cetera, et cetera. You're listening to The Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. Back with more right after this.
Good morning and welcome back to The Morning Magazine, presented by Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. It's time for part 2. Once again, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com. We also welcome our friends from Wisconsin Rapids Community Media. It's our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, and we had hoped to have some of the youth here, the Mayor's Youth Council, but it's finals day. Mm-hmm. So good luck, kids.
They were going to, I just put a plug in for what they were going to be here for, is next Monday, I believe the Culver's is is actually going to be hosting with the Mayor's Youth Council a fundraiser for the Aquatic Center development at Witter. So their intention was to invite our listeners and members of the community to come out and have dinner from 4 to 8 p.m. At Culver's to have dinner, enjoy some custard, and support the Aquatic Center development. Culver's is graciously donating 10% of the sales from that event toward the development.
Okay, well, and we thank Culver's. They do that for so many different groups, including veterans and everything. So thank you, Culver's, for that. And again, we know about a power outage on the River Block building and the downtown mill that has to do with the hydroelectric power system that powers the mill, and the River Block building is still part of that, and I guess they're working on that. The company is.
That's our understanding. Is they've got a diver looking at the dam and to figure out what's causing the issue. That's the known extent of the problem at this time.
Okay, moving on to since we're talking about the river and public works, that's how we call, Your Honor, a segue. There was a discussion about a change order policy for the West Side Lift Station and Force Main projects, as we know. And there was, and it devolved into this, whether or not the council, power play between, your whole, talk about what's a change, first off, for people wondering what the heck a change order policy is and how this works in it. From what I gather, the council still is in the loop on the whole thing.
Yeah, right. So the process is on the river crossing project and the West Side Lift Station. So the two critical pieces of infrastructure to get wastewater from the west side of our river to the east side and to the treatment plant is there's a crossing underneath the river, and actually at the bed of the river. And this time we're going to be boring a directional bore, a line underneath the riverbed to carry all the waste, the sewage that runs from the west side to the east side. And so the city awards a contract, and it prescribes here's how much it's going to cost for this, and this, the total project cost. And then every project has a contingency, an engineering contingency. Sometimes 8% is kind of a common number on these projects. It's a $7 million project. It's a huge project that's going to take many months to complete. And change orders is a typical process that we encounter certain things that are different from when we began the project. Basically, there were assumptions. Our assumptions were maybe incorrect, or we discovered other variables along the way. So the Public Works Director had asked the Public Works Committee, the city doesn't really have a solid change order policy on the books. In fact, when they did the $26 million wastewater treatment plant, the council actually divested all the authority in the plant manager and the treatment commission to make the decision. So the council was completely out of the loop. And that project ballooned in cost. I mean, I'll just say that. And they're probably for good reasons, of course. But so they really divested their authority. So this time around, the Public Works Director was asking the committee that in instances where there may be a work stoppage situation, that we would go to the mayor and seek approval. So, of course, my staff would inform me of the situation. And obviously, I got to balance the fiscal interest versus the continuity of the project, as well as the ratepayers that make sure that we're going to do this most cost effectively and efficiently. So the Public Works Director said if in instances the committee couldn't meet, that they would like the authority of the mayor to be able to sign off on these change orders, only up to the limit of the contingency. So the maximum amount that the contract that the city council approved would be the threshold that the mayor could approve. And I wasn't going to get in the thick of this whole power grab debate because that's not what this is about. I mean, at the end of the day, if the committee wants to spend their time approving change orders that are probably going to be approved anyway, by all means, it's one less thing that I have to worry about. But at the reality of it is to efficiently execute on a project, we have an administrator, a CEO who is the mayor, who should be most appropriately addressing these issues. But if the council and the committee want to deal with these issues, by all means, let them do it. So last night, the committee had discussed this apparently for an hour and a half on Monday night. Felt it was a power grab from the committee's authority, and voted against it. And so the council took it up last night. There was a motion to actually take up the proposed language, which is what the Public Works Director had asked for, and that ultimately passed the City Council last night. And so then there was at the end of the meeting, there was a referral to to reconsider, I believe, the action of the city council, so that way they can continue to take a crack at this. But the interesting part about the language was not only in the cases where the project may be stopped, that the mayor may approve those things, but that the committee would still meet if there was time. So generally 24 hours prior to the need to have an answer, the committee could be called to have a meeting, and then they could address the change order. The challenge with that is every committee action, the way our structure is, this common council has to approve it. So not only we're talking a meeting of the Public Works Committee meeting,
and you have to publicly notice it.
Exactly, within the 24-hour period. But we'd also have to have a consecutive city council meeting to approve that action. So government at its finest is when government moves very slow and it just doesn't not responsive. Well, geez, we're feeding into that, right?
Yeah.
So honestly, the council could decide how they want to do this. They chose to give me the authority in cases where the Public Works Committee couldn't meet, and up to the $100 and some thousand of contingency. On a $7 million project, $100 and some thousand contingency is a pretty small contingency, but nonetheless, that's what they decided to do last night, and life goes on.
And basically, what kind of things would lead to to this happening? What kind of problems in the field, as it were, would we be talking about?
Well, soil conditions is common, especially when you're talking about a river waterway where generally there's a granite, a number of types of rock material. And so in this case, they had done soil borings at the site to determine what the soil quality was. Well, they already discovered some issues with the sampling, that the sampling was maybe disparate, or it didn't show exactly what they thought, or they discovered some differences in what the soil boring showed. So this was a case where the project's going to pause until they can get a change order approved, and obviously there's some more engineering that goes into that, so they've got to do some engineering, but they also will pause the project or aspects of the project until they get a plan in place and the costs associated with that plan.
Okay. So I would think the best thing for us taxpayers is to have a process that is as expeditious and efficient as possible to minimize delay and expense to keep the project going.
I would think so. I mean, Alderperson Zerflu made that comment last night, that it's probably, on the flip side, there's maybe some benefits, exactly what you just said, to having the project continue on. One of the alderpersons requested information, Shane Blazer, and that's completely appropriate. Hey, we've approved this change order. Here's why, just to let you know. So they get calls from constituents of why the project cost is different than when it started. Those types of things. That's completely appropriate.
And I think you can do that just on a SOP.
Yeah.
During the project.
That's right.
Regular reports to the council.
Yep, weekly reports. It's the same we do on airport projects down at the Airport Commission, that, we discovered this, it's going to change the time or the scope or cost maybe. I mean, all of those things are regular parts of these projects.
There was, since you mentioned the airport, as part of the Rural Economic Development Summit last week, was that groundbreaking ceremony for the work that's already going on. And we should mention this work is the stuff funded out of the state budget. And why don't you talk a bit about what's going on at the airport, as well as the significance of it from an economic development standpoint? Yeah,
there is work already going on. That work, though, was planned and funded through regular state aid that airports across Wisconsin vie for. So essentially, the airport has two runways. The secondary runway, the short runway, is being fully reconstructed right now, and that was funded and planned for a number of years ago because it was projected that pavement was going to be end of life. And it has been. Those that know airport business or know people that fly in and out of that airport, that runway desperately needed to be reconstructed. And so that's really the part one of that. But part two was, back in 2012, the Airport Commission, the city and the town of Grand Rapids and City of Nakusa and Village of Port Edwards participated in an airport layout plan, which essentially identified the long-range improvements for the airport, which every good planning in municipality should be doing, right? Or every entity that involves infrastructure. So we planned for some long-range improvements. Well, when Sand Valley's operations indicated that we may need to move up those improvements because of demand and some operational need, we packaged with business leaders and many others in the area, got behind a request to the state legislature for some additional aid, which Representative Krug and Senator Tessin shepherded at the state level, and we were ultimately successful for $4 million of additional state aid. So essentially, those projects will begin this fall. And some already now, but generally this fall and next spring, where we'll be bringing some additional hangar carve-out space, but also apron, and that's generally where airplanes park. So it's the parking lot for the planes at the airport, if people think it in simple terms. And previously last year, we ran up against some space issues, that the quantity and the volume of air traffic at certain peak times, we were running up against space issues. And it's projected that we will continue to if we didn't deal with some additional space at the airport. So there'll be some parking space, some additional hangar locations and prep work done. So if somebody wants to start a corporate hangar or build a corporate hangar or operate a certain type of aviation-oriented business, or another business comes to town that requires air traffic or private air means, all these things benefit not only the Sand Valley development, but many other prospective developments that could come to this community. And then there's also taxiways. So when people travel, they generally taxi along a runway. They get to the end of the runway and they take off. Our airport doesn't have any taxiways today, so you have to actually taxi on the active runway, make a big turn, and take off on that same runway.
I wouldn't think that's as safe as
right. It works in general aviation airports, small airports, but if you've got a certain volume of traffic, it slows things down. It's just there's a number of impediments. So it's very much an economic development play, not only for current demand, but really for future, a new whole generation of aviation activity that may happen at our community.
And we're talking about this year that a huge increase in flights this year, because Sand Valley is booked going into next year. I mean, they're talking about a lot more flights, a lot more jets flying in this year. Rick Bacoca was here to talk about that on his Town of Rome update, which we'll have tomorrow, by the way. And so I guess and some of those people are going to be also business people maybe later on who go, hey, I went to play golf at Sand Valley, saw this interesting community, and they got a nice airport infrastructure. Let's go see if they got a plant facility or a plant location or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, when businesses in industry consider communities, they don't consider just the infrastructure and what they're going to be utilizing for their operations. They consider housing, again, where are their employees going to live? What are their employees going to do? What's there for leisure activity? Those are all major factors when business site selectors and business development folks look at various communities. So I have to put a plug in for the airport's open house. Is going to be held next Thursday, the 24th, out at the airport in conjunction with the Chamber of Commerce. It's a business after hours. So folks can come out and check the airport out, hear more about the specifics of our improvement plans and the major investments that are happening in that operation. And we're very excited because when we think about what was a very active airport in its inception when it began to an airport that became quite quiet after the industries changed in our community, is now becoming active again. I just think it's going to get the attention of businesses that are looking for assets that we're building out at the airport.
And the state obviously is interested. I noticed at the ceremony where folks from the WEDC and Wisconsin
office,
and the mayor's office, the governor's office. So this could become an important business airport in central Wisconsin.
That's right.
And we want them landing here and not having to go to neighboring airports.
That's right, because there is options, and that's the reality. We're going to have to close the airport around October 1st. So all that traffic that Sand Valley has planned for after October 1st, unfortunately, is going to have to go to a neighboring airport. But it's essential for us to close it to get the improvements underway to be open again next year. So those are the trade-offs. We know that other airports in our region can service the traffic, but quite frankly, we'd rather have that economic activity happen in our neighborhood.
Okay. We got to take one more break, and then we'll be back with more here on the Morning Magazine. At AM 1320. Welcome back to the Morning Magazine on AM 1320, as well as at Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, our monthly visit with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Vruwink. Some updates on other projects. Let's talk about aquatics.
Sure.
What's the latest on that?
So we just last week received an updated theming package, and essentially the theming package gives people a real-life view and look of how that facility would operate. We've gotten a lot of questions about scale. Is it too big? Is it too small? All these sorts of questions. And it really gives you a good sense of how the facility has been sized. But it also gives you a neat perspective on how we've incorporated local elements that we're known for, right? River community, we're, we've got a kind of a natural environment around here. And so we really incorporated those elements into the design. So we're nearly complete with the design package, which we're on schedule. We were on schedule to complete that between May and June. And ultimately, fundraising. We're still in fundraising mode. We're looking for lead gifts, and we continue to discuss with many folks now. Generally, foundations and businesses have a window of time where you can apply for donations, and so we're out of that. Mid-year, you're generally out of it. You do it at the end of the year, and you do it at the beginning. So there's a number of folks that are still actively monitoring the project. They're looking for other lead gifts to come in together with them, of course. As we've seen with the YMCA Boys and Girls Club, many lead gifts that are making that project possible. Of course, the community involvement is in smaller gifts are critical as well, but really the lead and large gifts are what make those large capital projects happen.
Okay, so what's the timetable for putting a shovel in the ground?
Well, we need the $4.5 million to break ground, and that can be in the form of pledges or it can be in the form of cash. The city would plan to borrow to cover those pledges until they're paid, generally over a span of 2 to 3 years. But we have enough money to break ground today. It's just we're not going to set ourselves up for a shortfall or having to pause the project if fundraising doesn't provide for it. So at this point, this facility would not open with a season opener next year because we're past the period of time where we'd have to break ground. But there is still a small window of time that over the course of summer months, we could break ground yet this fall and have the facility open mid-year, so around the 4th of July next year. So the residents would get 2 to 3 months still out of the facility. It just wouldn't open June 1st or around the Memorial Day weekend.
As the fundraising wraps up for the Y and Boys and Girls Club project, do you think that will free up other money for this project?
Yeah, I think some people are a bit surprised how quickly that project was fundraised, and I think that's great because intentionally or unintentionally it worked out that they had many donors that were motivated. I mean, that project has wanted to find a new home in our city for over a decade, and it was neat to see it really get close to fruition. Of course, they still have some fundraising to do and have some other desires that they'd like to fund, but it's really exciting that when people have a perception or maybe a less optimistic view that, man, we can't have these facilities or we can't afford them, the reality is we can. If people are motivated and want to get behind them, as they are in a number of ways with the YMCA project, they see the value in having an active Boys and Girls Club YMCA together to service the needs of our youth in our community and the families through the YMCA. They were very successful in their fundraising efforts.
Now, given that they're looking at the summer putting a shovel in the ground.
That's right. Yeah.
And now, how will they be working with the city as they redevelop that, what was the old mall site?
Sure. Well, we had an agreement with them, basically a developer's agreement, as we do with all developers in the city, to make sure that they're complying with certain conditions to not take shortcuts that may impact the health, safety, and welfare of our residents, so to speak. So the project there will be some demolition that'll begin late summer of the existing mall property, because most of the mall actually will be demolished. There's only 2 pieces of the mall that will remain: the former JCPenney, which will be partially the Boys and Girls Club, and then some of the mall spine, the kind of the central corridor where the VA clinic is expected to relocate. So the city will be working with them on its permits. We've gotten much of the site plan approval stuff out of the way, and so we believe, is provided they continue to be successful in their fundraising efforts. It sounds like there may be some events coming together early June to celebrate and mark the occasion for the final phase of the capital campaign. So I'll let them share all those details with you, but it's really exciting to see that redevelopment happen pretty quickly.
And then to go along with that, you have the planned development or proposal for that senior tower.
Yep.
How is that going?
It's going really well. In fact, we just concluded kind of a site plan revision for the property to maximize the amount of parking we can retain on site and really the available real estate that we can site the building really near the back of the sidewalk, essentially on 17th or 7th Avenue. And so that'll bring 40 senior housing units to the downtown area and put them right next door to senior resources and the trail system that the city has to promote, physical activity and well-being of our seniors. So we're really excited that project has pretty much been able to get sited on that property without creating conflicts with the other neighboring property users.
Okay. Other updates, Triangle Project and the other stuff on the east side downtown.
Yeah, so we've got a proposal out for, or a request for proposals, on the East Town Plaza property. We're still looking for interested individuals to submit their ideas to the city. The Triangle property still remains in site acquisition mode, and we're still looking to acquire the remaining property that the city doesn't own so the developer can begin its assessment and planning for how much parking underground will be on the site and then how much can be used for building footprint.
Okay, we got a caller, and we're coming up on shortage of times, but I want to give this caller a chance to talk to you. So you got about 5 minutes, so I'm giving you the floor. Good morning.
This will be a real quick one, guys. Thank you for a good show. I'm sorry that I entered it a little late and didn't hear the whole thing, but nevertheless, can you tell me the ramifications of trying to put our Common Council meeting into closed captioning? Living with a hearing-impaired person, and many times it is just almost impossible to hear what is going on. They're not close to the mic. You can't read lips from that far away. And I'm just thinking if we're really, truly trying to help out our elderly here or our disabled, as we give lip service to, funny thing, isn't it? Let's us try to get that into closed captioning, or is it just cost prohibitive? I'll listen offline.
Okay, that's actually a very good question.
It is a really good question. I believe there had been some state legislation, so our public access or public Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, as it's now formally known, they are part of a statewide network, and there was some discussion at their last conference recently on this issue, and we don't have any I don't have any information to share on cost estimates and things, but certainly the caller makes a good point. Just in the interim, we need to get our Common Council members speaking loudly and audibly in the microphones. I understood that last night's meeting was not well spoken into in terms of the microphones.
And there were some breakups too.
Some tech issues. So yeah, I didn't obviously watch the meeting yet or catch any of the recording. So, but in terms of that, I'll certainly refer it back to the communications manager, because I think that's a great question. We've been asked it before, and I just don't have a good answer on the air.
And like I said, you got some new council members, and they're going to have to get used to using the mic when you speak into the microphone.
That's right.
And, you have to get in terms of the Triangle building, is there anything new on that?
Essentially site acquisition. So we're looking to buy the property that the city doesn't own, and that not necessarily the city buying the property, but the developer buying the property. So they've been trying to make contact with the owner of Four Stools, and the other property is certainly, we've got a willing seller there, so we're not concerned about that. But ultimately it comes down to how much is the property going to be available for the redevelopment. And so we don't want to get shovels in the ground until we know whether or not some of that other property can be acquired.
Are we looking at when are we looking at for a reveal of what the project might look like?
It'll come down to if we know that property is available to purchase.
Okay.
So that's the challenge. If Four Stools agrees to sell to the developer and possibly relocate or get some other assistance in that regard, then we'll be able to fully get the renderings going that you're talking about for the design reveal. And then also want to mention the Spring Clean, which is happening this weekend. The neighborhood cleanup. The Young Professionals group is partnering with Beautification Council and I believe Clean Green Action, another group in town, to hold a spring neighborhood cleanup this weekend from 10 to noon. So they meet at Sportsman's Pub, and then they're going to fan out to different locations in the city. And I also understand there's another clean event happening this weekend, and Choose to Reuse.
Yeah, the Choose to Reuse in Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
And so
I'll let you talk about that. But I want to put a plug in for it because I think it's important for our area residents to take advantage of that
opportunity. It's the Southwood County 2018 Choose to Reuse, Saturday, May 19th, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Grand Rapids Town garage, the old transfer site, 2811 2 Mile Avenue. You bring stuff that you don't need and that someone else could use, and there are some charges for some of the electronics, obviously, and tires and the like, but there will be free disposal of car batteries, oil, washers and dryers, refrigerators, microwaves, and other large metal items. But there's if you have any questions, Bill, who called us before, you can reach him at 715-423-2469, and they are in desperate need for volunteers to help out with the event. It's this Saturday, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m.
That's right.
And it's open to anybody.
It's a great event.
And you don't have to bring stuff to take stuff. You can come to the event. It's just it's to keep stuff out of the landfill. That's right. The bottom line.
It's a great effort to support, and obviously thanks to Bill and all the volunteers that make that happen. It's a major feat. I can't pretend to explain how much of an undertaking it is, but I know it's a huge project.
Okay. Well, with that, I could ask a whole bunch of other questions, but we've gone through a lot today, and I guess I'll look forward to our next visit next month.
That's right. Thanks, Carl, and thanks to our listeners and our callers.
Okay, and that's Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink, and that's going to wrap up today's edition of the Morning Magazine on AM 1320 and streaming live at WFHR.com.